ॐ
आप्यायन्तु ममाङ्गानि वाक्प्राणश्चक्षुः श्रोत्रम् अतो बलमिन्द्रियाणि च सर्वाणि सर्वं ब्रह्मोपनिषदम् माहं ब्रह्म निराकुर्यां मा ब्रह्म निराकरोत् अनिराकरणमस्तु अनिराकरणं मे अस्तु तदात्मनि निरतेय उपनिषत्सु धर्माः ते मयि सन्तु ते मयि सन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः अनन्तगुणपूर्णत्वादगम्याय सुरैरपि सर्वेष्टदात्रे देवानां नमो नारायणाय ते. So good morning everyone, good evening, good afternoon. Let me get my oro. Yeah, okay, our options. So there we go. So yeah, good afternoon, good morning, and good evening. Thanks for joining for the seventh session. Today is an interesting session. I hope over the next 1 hour we will pick up some deep philosophical ideas of this particular portion of Talavakara Upanishad. Just before we do that, let's think about all the rishis, Chaturmukha Brahma, Sadashiva, Parvati, Talavakara Rishi, and all the acharyas who have given us the commentaries. The Devata for this Upanishad, which belongs to Samaveda, is Vishnu, who is also goes with infinite names, particular names for our contemplation for this Upanishad is Hrishikesha, Kapila, Aniruddha, and Gayatri Namaka Paramatma. The chandas, as we know, the first two mantras verses were in Trishtup chandas. Then primarily it is Anushtup chandas, and then it goes to some really interesting chandas as we move along. Okay. So where were we? We have done two verses. Keneshitam Om Keneshitam Patati Preshitam Manaha Kena Pranaha Pratamaha Preti Yuktaha Keneshitam Vachamimam Vadanti Chakshuhu Shrotram Kavudevo Yunakti. That was the question of Sadashiva, and Chaturmukha immediately answered, Shrotrasya Shrotram Manasa Mano Yadvachaha Vacham Savupranasya Pranaha Chakshushash Chakshuhu Atimuchya Diraha Pretya Asmal Lokad Amruta Bhavanti. So, in fact, after the first question in this particular Kanda, the rest of the Kanda, about 9 verses, and the rest of the Adhyaya as well, it is the Chaturmukha who is actually answering Sadashiva. So in the second verse, we have done the second verse in very great detail over the last 4 or 5 sessions. So let's directly dig into the third verse. After saying the second verse, Chaturmukha immediately said, Natatra chakshur gacchati, navag gacchati, no manaha, na vidmaha, na vijanimo, yat yetat anusushyat, which is a very, very important verse for philosophical speculation and for philosophical understanding of our Shastra. As you know, one of the greatness of Vedic philosophy is philosophy and spirituality are combined in Sanatana Dharma. So there is a lot of philosophy in this verse. Na tatra chakshur gacchati, navag gacchati, no manaha. So, what are the philosophical points that we were discussing? So, over the last 2 weeks, we looked at the epistemological approach to spirituality, how to understand this Brahman from a very epistemological perspective. Epistemology, as you know, is the study of knowledge and the means of knowledge. And the best discussion of epistemology comes from Srimad Acharya in Pramana Lakshana and his greatest commentator Jayatirtha in Pramana Paddhati. So, if we want to have a correct approach to epistemology, my humble request is check these works out. These are amazing works. Yatartam pramanam tad vividam kevalam anupramanam cha yatartha jnanam kevalam chaturvidam isha lakshmi yogi ayogi bedena tat sadhanam anupramanam trividam pratyaksha anumana agama iti. Okay, so this is where we were discussing last week, because anupramana means tat sadhanam anupramanam. Sadhana means an instrument for what? For kevala pramanam, that is pure knowledge. What is pure knowledge? Yatartha jnanam. Yatartha jnanam kevalam tat sadhanam anupramanam, and the anupramana are the means of knowledge are only three: pratyaksha, anumana, and agama. So that is all that we have at our disposal to even have a remote idea of who this Brahman is. Brahma Shabdashta Vishnaveva, that is what our Acharya has resolved this. So we don't have any confusion that Brahman means Vishnu. Vishnu means Brahman. Okay. Brahma Shabdashta Vishnaveva. So that we are very clear in our Satsanga that that is all it is. There is nothing called a nebulous entity. Yeah. There is only Brahman who is also called Vishnu. Okay. So how do we know this person? So our Chaturmukha Brahma has said, Natatra Chakshur Gachati, Navag Gachati, no Manaha. So basically, what did he remind us? So Sadashiva asked him, look, Chaturmukha, please explain to me about how this guy is doing Anushasana or Anushishyat. Anushishyat means regulator. How is he controlling and regulating all the aspects of the body was the first question, right? And I want to know about Kavu Devo Yunakti. I want to know about that Deva who is controlling everything in the universe, who is a regulator of everything in the universe, is the question from Sadashiva. Okay, so Chaturmukha Brahma in this context is saying, Shiva, na tatra chakshur gacchati, navag gacchati no manaha. So these three instruments of knowledge that we have been discussing, Chaturmukha says, using these three instruments of knowledge, you cannot know this Brahman. It's a very cryptic statement for Chaturmukha Brahman. Okay, so a brief recap, we understood that anything that needs to be known is called Nyaya. So the objects of the universe as well as Brahman are also objects of knowledge. So they also are Nyaya. Knower, Nyatru, somebody who knows is called Nyatru. So that is you and me, souls, we need to know about this Nyaya called the Brahman. Okay, when we know about this, then we get Jnana. Okay, so Jnana always has bipolar character, isn't it? There is always a Nyatru and a Nyaya. This is all foundational stuff. You cannot have knowledge on its own. That is the view of the monastic thinkers. They somehow think that knowledge alone can exist. But other schools of Vedanta don't subscribe to that view. They say knowledge on its own does not exist. There has to be a Nyatra and there has to be an object to be known. Okay. And then we understood Swarupa Jnanam, Manovritti Jnanam and all that. Manovritti Jnanam is the modification of the mind stuff, which is the knowledge of the material world. Swarupa Jnanam is internal knowledge where the Jiva Swarupa itself becomes aware of itself and its Antaryami. Okay, so that is the Swarupa Jnanam. And then you have Manovritti Jnanam. But behind all this is it is the soul that receives and becomes aware. So it is the soul that becomes aware of knowledge. Soul consciousness is being aware of itself and the external world. That is consciousness. Okay, and this presence of the soul we can infer by the presence of consciousness. Being conscious means you are sentient, means you are a soul, and the soul is what has Swarupa Jnana and Manovritti Jnana, but at the end of the day it is Jnana. So those are all the ideas that we have done. So in the previous two classes, what Chaturmukha Brahma told us, he told us na tatra chakshur gacchati. The eyes cannot see the Brahman, or we cannot get the knowledge of Brahman through our eyes. What does that mean? Of course, it means so many other things. Eyes is an instrument of perception. It is an instrument of perceptual knowledge. So it is pratyaksha. So eyes is the supreme, it is the most celebrated knowledge sense organ. The most celebrated sense organ is the eye. So here Chaturmukha places eyes as important. Yeah. So natatra chakshur gacchati, he says that first, which by implying pratyaksha. So material eyes cannot obtain the knowledge of God for us jivas. And also we understood wherever in the Vedas material things are being discussed, we knew that we should always think about Abhimani Devatas. Abhimani Vyapadeshastu Tat Darshanat Badarayana. So material eyes. Who is the Abhimani of the material eyes? Surya. So by implication, Surya means all other Tattva Abhimani Devatas can also be included in this. So what Chaturmukha has said is, your material eyes, that is yours, that is we in the satsang, our material eyes cannot see Brahman. Okay, that is a given. But so also the Tattvabhimani Devata of the eye, which is Surya, cannot also know him. Okay, so this is a bit interesting. How can Chaturmukha say Surya does not know him? So we have done that. We'll come to that in a minute. So by implication, all organs of perception and their Tattvabhimani Devatas cannot have a knowledge of Brahman, i.e., how he is controlling, how he is regulating this universe, How did he bring forth the eightfold cosmic dispensation? How did he create? We can only say Janmadhyasya Yataha. We can only kind of understand he creates, but who knows how he creates? What is his standard operating procedure? How does he do it? Nobody actually knows. So that is the discussion there. How does he control the things that he creates? So what is great? What is the greatness of God's creatorship? He not only creates, he enters into his creation and controls it. Tat srishtva tadeva anupravishate, as you know from Taittiriya Upanishad. So understanding all this becomes very difficult even for the Tattvabhimani Devatas, is what Chaturmukha Brahma is saying from perception. So the next verse, of course, is Navagachati. So from Vak, we understood Agamas. Okay? So the verbal testimony has got its own limitations, is what Chaturmukha Brahma is saying. Words can give you some denotation, connotations about Brahman, but they have their own limitations. Okay, so something we have thought about this very carefully over the last 2 to 3 sessions. Speech cannot obtain the knowledge of God. Yeah, we may read a number of scriptures, but for us individually, just by reading a book or a scripture, we cannot obtain the knowledge of the God, in the sense cannot get the experience. We cannot experience that Paramatma. All that we are seeing in those words is the experiences of somebody else, experiences of rishis, for example, that has been documented in detail in the Vedas and the Upanishads. But for us, it is still merely a set of words. We haven't experienced that Paramatma. That is what our Chaturmukha is leading to. Speech cannot obtain the God of God, or cannot obtain the knowledge of God. So also the Tattvabhimani Devatas of Vak. And there are many of the Tattvabhimani of the Vaks in Vedic philosophy, as you know. Agni is primary, and then we talk about Parvati. So even Agni and Parvati cannot know him. Okay, is what Chaturmukha Brahma is telling Shiva. So very complex ideas, but for us to be thinking about these problems. Yeah, yeah. So then the question is, if speech can, from speech means what? Words, and the words are sounds, and then we hear the sounds, and then that becomes a modification of the mind stuff, then we get a knowledge. So that is the sequence, right? So the question there is, if how is that possible? What is the differences of view in Vedic Vedanta schools, Vedanta Darshana? What are the various views about whether words can give us a knowledge of Paramatma or not? Can we know Paramatma through words? Okay. And last week we looked at this concept called Avachyatva in Mayavada. Okay. It's very interesting about their hypothesis. So we looked at how in Mayavada, Nirguna Brahman is the only real entity. Saguna Brahman does not actually exist. You and me actually do not exist. The material world actually does not exist in reality. The only real is Nirguna Brahman. So that must become the whole purpose of Vedas, right? If Nirguna Brahman is the only real, then that must become the purpose of the Vedas. Okay? But then the monastic philosophers themselves say that the Vedas cannot give you the direct knowledge of Nirguna Brahman. Okay, so this is something that folks who are inclined in that direction needs to be seriously thinking about. I doubt if there are folks who think this, but our acharyas have actually told us that if we want to follow the path where we really are looking after emancipation and liberation, we need to think about this problem. Is Nirguna Brahman knowable through words? Mayavada has very clearly said is not knowable through words directly. So last week, if you remember, we did Mukhya Vritti and Lakshana Vritti and so on. So the monastic view is Nirguna Brahman cannot be known through Mukhya Vritti of the words. They can be known only by Lakshana Vritti, like Gangayam Goshaha, Ganga Tire Goshaha, that we did last week. But our Srimad Acharya has given us a very important point for us to think and ruminate about. If that is the case, if every word of the Vedas cannot, through the words of the Vedas, we cannot know Nirguna Brahman directly, then Nirguna Brahman can also not be known through Lakshana Vritti. Okay, why? Sarva Shabda Avachyasya Lakshana Ayuktehe. So this is a very, very important statement by Acharya that needs to be ruminated and thought about very seriously. What does it tell you? If even for Lakshana Vritti you need a word. So when I say Gangayam Goshaha, I add in a word called Tire. Ganga Tire Goshaha is the Lakshana Vritti there. So there for the Lakshana Vritti to happen, there has to be another word, which is Tira there. But for Nirguna Brahman, you can never do this. Okay. So this is the problem of monistic philosophers. I really don't know how they are able to resolve this problem. Nyayasudha Jayatirtha has said, Vipratipannam na lakshyam kenapi padena avachyatvad vaidharmyena tiravat, which is what we discussed about. So these are the views of, this is the discussion which should prompt us to think about this problem a little bit more deeply about words. Can words denote Brahman? So then the question is, what is the pragmatic approach? So last week we looked at, there are various verses in the Vedas which talk about the fact that God is beyond comprehension and is inexpressible. Yeah, we picked up one verse, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa. But the same Vedas also say God can be, what can be seen can be expressed in words. Atmava are drashtavyaha shrotavyo mantavyo nitidyasitavyaha maitreyi. So you got several verses, important verses in the Vedas. On one hand, they seem to suggest God is beyond comprehension and inexpressible. But on the other hand, they also seem to suggest what can be seen can be expressed as words. So how do you reconcile this? So the reconciliation here comes from the Taittiriya Upanishad verse itself. Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasaha. What does it mean? God cannot be known fully. That is the answer there. We cannot know him fully. In that sense, yato vacho nivartante aprapya. We can't grasp him fully. That is the meaning. Okay. But God can be known as per our capacity. As per Jiva Swabhava, we can get a knowledge about him. Not all of us are capable of getting all the knowledge, but we can acquire as per our capacity, says Garuda Purana. Pashyanto api na pashyanti mero rupam vipashtitaha. We looked at that statement cited by Acharya in his works about we can only see the mountain Himalayas and then say, oh, I have now got the knowledge of Himalayas. We can touch the Himalayas to some extent and get some knowledge, but we can't go and hug the whole of the Himalayas. We can't see every atom that is there in the Himalayas and then say, I now know Himalayas. So we have our limitation, but we can have some knowledge is the key view. Okay, so that is what we have done over the last 6 satsang sessions to understand this very important problem. Natatra chakshur gacchati nava gacchati. Now we are doing the new word for this particular verse, third verse. No manaha. So Chaturmukha says to Rudra himself. Rudra is the Mano Abhimani. And to Rudra, Chaturmukha is saying, no manaha, Rudra, na tatra chakshur gacchati, navag gacchati, no manaha. So what is that no manaha? No manaha. Manaha means the mind. So there is no problem there. And again, Taittiriya Upanishad, that's what it says, isn't it? Aprapya manasa saha. Saha, that Brahman, aprapya, through what? Through manas. You cannot grasp it. So the mind cannot reach it, says Chaturmukha Brahma, which is not surprising because what is this mind's operation? Our material mind's operation is through the input that comes from our sensory organs, which are also material. So whatever the mind thinks, the mind only processes the sensory material information. But this Brahman is totally non-material. In that case, how can this material mind actually grasp him? Okay, that is fairly straightforward to understand. So this is very, very important for us as well. So whatever we are doing in our mundane world is only a material construct. Yeah, whatever we are doing at this point, we may go to a temple, we may dance, we may look at a picture, we may do whatever. It is all a material construct. Okay, but that material mind cannot reach it. As I said a minute ago, if it is not seen and heard, how can the mind think about it? Okay, because this whole equation is totally material here. Okay, so that is a given. Now, the third point here is mana. Manaha also means manana. Okay, mana means manana. Manana means alochane, thinking about something, and we do this manana all the time through inference. The process of inferential knowledge is manana. So here, from an epistemological perspective, the discussion that Chaturmukha is having with Sadashiva is Paramatma cannot be known through pure anumana. Anumana means reasoning. Logical reasoning also he cannot be known, which is very, very interesting. Can we know God through logic or reasoning? So this is a common statement, isn't it, by the so-called scientific minded people, or the so-called folks who have a very scientific predisposition, that they want everything to be served to them in a very logical fashion, in a very reasonable fashion. So if an atheist comes to you and tells you, can you prove God through logic? Okay. If somebody says that, the first thing we should say is no. God cannot be known by pure reasoning. He cannot be known by pure logic. Period. The famous Western philosopher Immanuel Kant, and many of you would be very familiar with his work called Critique of Pure Reason. So he writes a book called Critique of Pure Reason, which was one of the most influential philosophy of his time, written by him, where he shows that God cannot be known by pure reasoning. Okay, but Immanuel Kant probably may or may not have been aware of the fact that our rishis of Krishna Yajurveda had discussed this eons ago. Na isha tarkena matihi apaneya of Katha Upanishad. So, na isha tarkena. Tarka means reasoning or logic. So, Katha Upanishad has already told. Okay, so Immanuel Kant in the 18th century, he came up with this idea, which is very popular in the West. But our Eastern philosophies knew all this long time ago. So what did Katha Upanishad, what did Yama teach Nachiketa in Katha Upanishad? He said, Naisha tarkena matihi apaneya. Matihi means comes to your knowledge, which one through reasoning, this Paramatma can never be grasped. Okay, and he put a very, very interesting word, apaneya. Okay, so Jayatirtha in his work actually gives a beautiful explanation of the word apaneya. The etymology of the apaneya, aneya, apaneya, apaneya. Aneya means grasp through logic. Apaneya means cannot be proven. So aneya means proving something through logic. Apaneya means not able to prove something to logic. So apaneya means both. You can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God. That is what Yama says to Nachiketa. Very beautiful statement captured by that word apaneya. So what is the only way of knowing? Then Yama says, Prokta anyena eva sugnaya preshta. Preshta, he is actually saying, Nachiketa, preshta, how do you know him? Sugnanaya preshta, sugnana. That person who has true knowledge, only through him you can know. Okay, not through your dry empirical speculation. Okay, so that is a very important concept of Sanatana Dharma, is you cannot prove God's existence or non-existence through pure reasoning or logic. It has got its limitations. If somebody says, I can prove God through logic, the other school will say, I can prove God without logic. Through logic, I can prove the non-existence of God through logic. So you can never settle this. Anyway, that is what we have. That is also the third means of knowledge. And there are 5 components of inference and so on, which we have done before. So we will just move on to the next slide. Okay, so here is an important point about logic or reasoning. Reasoning or logic on its own cannot give us the knowledge of God. Okay, so this is very, very important statement about means of knowledge of inference. Inferential knowledge is a dependent proof. Okay, so this is a key point, and the credit of actually bringing forth the real epistemological position of reasoning and logic in philosophy goes to Srimad Acharya, who has actually given us the direction to say that Anumana is a dependent proof. Okay, so logic or reasoning in material plane is dependent on perceptual knowledge gained through material senses using material objects to observe the material universe. So what is happening in this material logical reasoning? You're dependent on a perceptual knowledge of a material object before. Okay, so even in your mundane logical reasoning, you should have had a prior perceptual knowledge of something. So you're dependent on a perceptual knowledge through sense organs about a material object. Then only you can do logical reasoning exactly like this. This mountain has got smoke, therefore you inference fire. Why? Because in a previous experience at home, you have seen when somebody is cooking, there is smoke, and whenever there is smoke, you have seen the fire. So you create a concomitance, as it's called, so that vyapti, wherever there is smoke, there is fire. So here you are seeing the smoke, so your mind then thinks, oh, I have had this prior perceptual experience of this, so now I'm going to work it out in my mind, and now when I see the smoke, I can link that smoke to the prior experience of that smoke and fire. So now I have a knowledge that this mountain has got fire. Okay, but it is dependent on a prior perception. So think about that inference problem. It's got huge limitations. That material reasoning, yeah, so-called logical reasoning that some of these atheists talk about when they talk about the non-existence of God. Similar also it holds for Shastras also. Okay, so even you use logical reasoning and logic in the understanding of the Shastras. So this is important. Brihat Samhita, for example, will give you all sorts of rules: Upakrama, Upasamhara, Abhyasa, Purvata, Phalam, Arthavada, Upapattihi. So those are all the Tatparya lingas that we use. Upapatti means logic. Nirdosha upapattir anumanam pramana lakshana, which is a defectless reasoning is this. So, Shruti text, that is the Vedic text supported by reasons found in the Shruti themselves, is highly authoritative. Okay, so these are all the rules of interpretations of the Vedic language, which you can do a lot of research into it. Okay, so here is a quick quiz. Who is called as Anumana Tirtha? Who is going to give us a quick answer? In one of the in the Vedanta Darshana, one Acharya is called Anumana Tirtha. Who is going to tell us who it is? So Srimad Ananda Tirtha or Madhvacharya Bhagavad Padacharya is called Anumana Tirtha because he is the first philosopher to actually give us the epistemological position of where is reasoning placed in the source of knowledge. There is a work called Prapancha Mithyatva Anumana Kandanam. So just go and check this out, where Srimad Acharya takes this Vimatam Mithya Drishyatvad example and he shows all the possible defects that can be in a syllogism that actually exist in that view of the monistic thinkers, and through that example he is able to illustrate and give us what are all the possible defects that are possible in a syllogism or a reasoning, and what are the epistemological positions of Anumana, that it is not upajivya, it is only upajivaka, it is only a dependent on either perception or scriptures. Okay, it is not an independent source. So when Chaturmukha said no manaha, it makes a lot of sense. Mind cannot obtain the knowledge of him. Pure reasoning cannot obtain the knowledge of him. Tattvabhimani Devata of the mind, which is Rudra, Garuda, Sesha, and so many of the others, Chandra, Parjanya, and so on, they are all Tattvabhimani Devatas of the mind. They also cannot have a knowledge of him. Okay, fully, you have to put inverted commas fully to understand this. So, mind cannot obtain the knowledge of him. Tattvabhimani of the mind also cannot obtain the knowledge of him. So then at this point, Rudra is a Tattvabhimani of the mind. And the Chaturmukha here is saying, mate, you can't get a full knowledge of him. So at that point, so this is Rudra's doubt, yeah. So if I cannot know him, at least you know him, Chaturmukha. Okay, please explain about him and Lord's controllership in detail. So that is what Rudra is thinking. I don't know, I accept, but you are an exalted soul, Chaturmukha. At least you know him, right? Explain about him and the Lord's controllership in detail to me. Okay. Immediately in the next line of this verse, and this is also a key epistemological argument, and I'll come to this. That is why this verse is so important. Chaturmukha immediately says, Rudra na vidmaha. I do not know. Na vijanimo. I do not know the details of what? Yat etat anushishyat. How this Brahman, Vishnu is doing all this. How does he create the universe? How does he control his creation and so on? Na vidmaha. That is in plural. We'll come to that in a minute. Na vidmaha, na vijanimo. Even I do not know how he does this anushishyat. Okay, so let's look at this a little bit in detail. So, na vidmaha. Vidma means what? Vid means know, to know, knowledge. Yeah. Vidma means knowledge. Here, vidma means general knowledge. So, our Chaturmukha is first saying, we do not have a general knowledge about itself, what he is. Even the general view of who this Brahman is, who this Vishnu is itself, I don't know. What to say about specific or special knowledge? It's called Kaimutya Nyaya. Okay, so you can check this out. So, na vijanimo. If I don't even know him generally, I of course will not also know the specific knowledge of how he does all these various jobs. Na vijanimo. Special or specific knowledge. I actually do not know, and I also do not know how to tell that little that we know. Okay, so this is his problem. Okay, about what? Yat etat anusishyat. Okay, anushishyat. We discussed that independent regulator of all is the meaning of anushishya. Anushishya means regulatorship, controllership. Okay. Yat etat. Etat is that one which is very close to you as your antaryaman. How does he regulate? How this being regulates everything, we do not know. And Chaturmukha's problem also is, I do not know how to tell that little that we know about his regulatorship. Okay, this is how you read that verse, two different ways. Na vijanimo yati etat anusishyat. Okay. Yat etat anushishyat, yat etat anushishyat, how he does this regulatorship, how can I explain it to you? It is very difficult for me to put in words and explain something to you. Na vijanimo. It is actually very difficult to explain one's experience, right? And we have taken a number of examples in our satsangs about how do you explain something about the taste of a coffee. Can you put in words about the taste of a coffee? If I pick up a glass and have a sip of coffee, I experience the taste of a coffee. How am I going to write it in words and say this is the taste of a coffee? It is not possible. Yeah, because it is your individual experience. So actually putting one's experience into words is actually a very difficult problem. Okay, so these are all the limitations of language, including the Vedas. Vedas only document the experience of somebody else. Okay. But for us to understand this Paramatma, we have to experience it ourselves. Okay. Until we experience this ourselves, it remains a paroksha jnana, which is an indirect knowledge. It is not a direct knowledge, which is direct experience. So this is a key idea that Srimad Acharya comes again and again in his various works. So this is one way of looking at it. I don't know how to explain to him. But there is a further, deeper understanding of this verse from a very epistemological perspective. And again, I'll make an attempt to give you a flavor of what is this pure knowledge itself. So that itself is a deep philosophical problem. The Chaturmukha handles this in this verse in Talavakara, in the third verse. So what is that? So let us look at all the Abhimani Devatas. So every person that has been described here is comes in this discussion in the Talavakara Upanishad. Okay. So there is a second way of looking at this. For that, we need to go back to our Mundaka Upanishad, right? We had a very similar verse. Nacha chakshusha grhyate napi vacha na anyair devaihi tapasa karmanava jnana prasadena vishuddha shatva tatastu tam pashyate nishkalam dhyayamanaha. So go back to the verse. Na anyair devaihi. Previous verse was chakshusha and vacha. Now anyai devahi. This itself is a obvious illustration of what is it that in Mundaka Upanishad Angirasa is telling Saunaka. Is talking about all these Abhimani Devatas. Okay, so we have to take that Abhimani Devata in this perspective and look at this. Chaturmukha is saying Na vidmaha. We do not know. So that is what Chaturmukha Brahma is saying. He says, we do not know. Who are these we? Okay, so if you want to watch those words carefully, that itself opens up deep philosophical ideas for us. We do not know, says Chaturmukha Brahma. Who we? Who are we? Okay? And there are so many ways of understanding this. So our gurus teachers, it's Atmani Bahuvachanam. Sometimes we ourselves will say, we do not know. So if you might have heard all this Swamiji say, we do not know. We. So many Swamijis will use plurals in their language. Atmani Bahuvachanam. Actually, it means I do not know, but it is to say we do not know means I do not know. Atmani Bahuvachanam. It's a popular usage in Sanskrit language. The second one is, if you take it literally, we do not know. Who are these we? Okay. So, who is going to tell us about Parashukla Trayas in Vedic pantheon? Anybody wants to share their ideas of Parashukla Trayas? Anybody wants to tell us about this? We have discussed this before, I hope. Okay, no worries. So this is maybe a new idea for some of us in the satsang. So when Chaturmukha is saying we, he is telling a group of folks. Okay, a group of folks, even we do not know, is what Chaturmukha is saying. What does that mean? He is actually talking about, he is actually keeping all these groups. They are called Parashukla Trayas. Okay, in Vedic philosophy, Parashukla Trayas. This is really interesting, and I want to close today's session talking about this pure knowledge, which will then close this verse. So Parashukla Trayas are Shri Tattva, number 2 in the Vedic rank, Vishnu's consort. Then Vishnu and Lakshmi's children, Chaturmukha Brahma, and Chaturmukha Brahma belongs to the group of Rujus, including Vayu, Latavya, Ghavya, and so on. We have a list of 100 in our scriptures, but there are actually infinite Rujus. Their consorts, Rijunis, Chaturmukha's consort Saraswati, Vayu's consort Bharati. So this group, second, third, and fourth in the Vedic rank, they are called Para Shukla Trayas. Okay, so we'll come to what does that actually mean. Para Shukla Trayas. Okay, what does that mean? They will come to that in the subsequent slides. But that is what Chaturmukha is talking about. We do not know. The second interpretation of this is the Parashukla Trayas also do not know as to how this chap controls everything in the universe. Okay. So we cannot know Brahman fully. Why is what even Chaturmukha seems to be hinting now, right? So I just want to open this up for a minute for folks to put in their ideas. We cannot know Brahman. Why? We have discussed so far that we cannot know him fully. Why is it that we cannot know him fully? Anybody wants to share their ideas, please? Thoughts, please. Some people claim that they know Brahman fully, but that probably is imagination. We cannot know him fully. Why? Because Brahman is infinite. Okay, that's a simple answer to that. Okay, we cannot know him fully. Even Chaturmukha says, "I don't know, mate." Highest among the souls, he says he does not know. And by also putting we, he is also saying even the Parashukla Trayas, in whom I am a part of the Parashukla Trayas, we do not know him. Why? Brahman is infinite. Souls are finite. We are only talking about souls and Brahman in this slide. There is, of course, the Shri Tattva. She is all pervasive. Lakshmi is also all pervasive like Vishnu. But in this slide, we are just talking about us mundane jivas and Brahman. We cannot know him fully for the simple reason that we are finite. Brahman is infinite. Okay, so we know that from Taittiriya Upanishad, right? Brahmavid apnoti param tadesha abhyukta satyam jnanam anantam brahma. This Brahman is anantam, infinite. That is the definition of Brahman. Satyam jnanam anantam. That is the definition of Brahman. He is infinite. Of course, the Shukla Yajurveda Shanti mantra is Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva avashishyate. Purna means full, means infinite. Everything about Brahman is infinite. He is infinite. His avatara is infinite. His vyuha forms are infinite. His avatara forms are infinite. These avatara forms comes from this infinite Brahman, and they go back to infinite Brahman, and so on. So this verse only is talking about Brahman and his Purnatva, nothing to do with the universe. Okay. Brahman is infinite. His avatara is infinite. His vyuha forms are infinite, and these avatara and vyuha infinite forms are non-different from the Narayana, who is also infinite. Is this Shanti mantra? And of course, Gita 10:15. Shall we get one of us to recite the Gita 10:15, please? Where Arjuna is saying, Anand, go for it. Thank you.
स्वयमेवात्मनात्मानं वेदत्वं पुरुषोत्तम भूतभावनभूतेश देवदेव जगत्पते.
Wonderful, Anandji. Fantastic. So Arjuna himself said, Krishna, you alone know yourself. None of us can know you fully. Even Krishna, Arjuna himself, who is Indra, of course, and he also says that in Gita. So in fact, if you look at the Brahma Sutra, the whole of the Samanvaya Adhyaya is to establish the Gunapurnatva of Brahman. Okay. So the Acharya in Talavakara Upanishad Bhasha, Srimad Acharya gives a very, very simple equation for us. He is Agamyaha. Agamya means we can't know him fully. Sarvadeva Ishta, even by all the Devatas. Why? Paripurnatva Hetutaha. The reason being, he is Paripurna. He is infinite. Okay. Because he is infinite, the souls are finite, they are just not able to grasp the infinite. They can only touch him and know him as per their capacity, is the view. Okay. So then again you can ask that question, right? So you can still debate this further. Say, okay, fine, I am finite, but just because I'm finite, why should I not know the infinite fully? Let it be so. Why can't we know Brahman fully? Why is that not possible? Okay, that was also next level of deeper philosophical. So why is that not possible? Anybody wants to tell us why is it not? I may be finite, but why can just because I'm finite, why can't I know about this Brahman who is infinite? Is that not? Is that possible or impossible? Anybody has any initial thoughts? Anand, yes.
I'll try. We have contemplated so far that he's he's unknown, because even the eyes can't see him, the Vagachari we can't tell about him, or the mind. He's unknown and he's endless. So therefore we can know him a bit, maybe a glimpse of it, but to know him fully is an impossible thing. How can we know him when he's unknown? And how can we finite souls know him?
Thank
So
you very much, Anandji. Very, very,
yeah.
very interesting summary. Sorry, did we have another?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Panagash.
And what I like to think of an example is if we have an infinite, let's say, an electricity source, but we are like a 10 watt or a 100 watt bulb. How much of electricity sort of goes through that? It's only able to sort of shine up to the extent of a 10 watt or a 100 watt capacity. It's dependent on the bulb's capacity, regardless of how much electricity it goes through it. So in the same way, it depends on our capacity. If we are finite, how much we can sort of soak in that knowledge and understand Brahman.
Oh, thank you, Panagachi. Very, 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 very interesting example that brings out that idea. Thank you so much, Panagachi. Very well put. Sushrut, you had something to add here.
Geeta was going to say something. I was just thinking of Deshatah, Gunatah, Kalatah. Is like Purna, isn't it? So we are not like that. So we cannot, or Jivas cannot understand the extent. That's just a
Thank you very much, Neetaji. Thank you. Yes, very, very interesting ideas. And I think we have captured the thought.
Suresh here.
Suresh,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. So just I think similar, but maybe slightly put it differently is if I need to know something, I must have the capacity to know it. Like I can understand something that I have studied and I can know it fully. So unless I am infinite, unless I am, at least equal or bigger than Brahman, there is no way I can know that entity completely. So unless, I mean, and that we have, if we accept that he is the only supreme, all-knowing, ever-pervading entity, then there is only one person that can know him fully, and that is he himself. So that's the
Beautiful, Sureshji. Excellent, excellent thoughts there. Deval.
I, I mean, it's a question rather than an answer. It's about sentience. If God is 100% sentient, even if we are 99, which is Chaturmukha Brahma, he can know that there is something more, but he can't know that 1%. Is the logical way I'm thinking about it.
Perfectly logical and reasonable way, Tankan. Devalji, thank you very much. So, wanted to thank everyone for excellent inputs here. So, if we can think about even a simple problem, right? Do we all have the same clarity of knowledge of things in the universe? Okay, you start at that level, and then if you go deep, then you can also, from an epistemological angle of actually knowing that concept of knowledge itself, as all of us here have discussed this a minute ago, you will be able to grasp this idea. Do all of us have the same clarity of knowledge of things in the universe? There's some people who have this delusion that they all of us have the same clarity of knowledge of things in the universe. I give a simple example. Take an ice cream cone. I put few organisms here, living things. They've got souls in them. They're sentient beings. You got bacteria, you got a worm, you got an ant, you got a bee, and you got a bird. And you've also got a human being like you and me. We are all looking at this ice cream, but do we all get the same knowledge of the ice cream? Each one is getting a knowledge of the ice cream based on its own capacity of what are all the instruments that it's endowed with, and it is able to get a knowledge of this ice cream. This bacteria will probably invade this, the worm will go and eat it, the ant will lick it, the bee will hover around it and take a few something. Maybe the bird is more interested in the cone, and the humans are more interested in the whole thing because they're looking at it and they're getting a knowledge of the ice cream there based on their capacity. Now, here is another question in this equation. If Vishnu is looking at this ice cream, or if Chaitanya Prakriti is looking at this ice cream, what kind of knowledge do they get about this ice cream? Is that clarity and the intensity of knowledge of Brahman and Chaitanya Prakriti or Lakshmi different from all of us who have a knowledge of this ice cream? Anybody wants to kind of give an idea here? What would their knowledge of ice cream would be? What would be Brahman's knowledge of ice cream? It's going to be infinitely different, isn't it? And even Chaitanya Prakriti, it's going to be infinitely different. That clarity of knowledge is different. Okay, so without going into the nitty-gritties of it, when you want to know about something, you also Anand, yeah.
It's a bit humorous because we are taking ice cream. Ice cream is knowable. The clarity of knowledge of the Sri Tattva about Brahman will probably be a lower level rather than ice cream. Am I right?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Anaji. We'll come to that. So what I'm trying to get here is to get a knowledge of an object. To get a full knowledge of an object, we should also know what this object is not. And there are infinite things in the universe, okay? There are infinite things in the universe. To want to get a correct knowledge of this ice cream, you should also know what this ice cream is not. That means you should have an infinite knowledge of other things to be able to say what this is not and what it is. That is the comprehensive view of knowledge. And that kind of knowledge, that vastness of knowledge is possible only with Brahman and Chaitanya Prakriti. You and me, we know maybe this is not a coffee, maybe it is not a vanilla ice cream. Those are all the things we may know. But Brahman and Chaitanya Prakriti will have a different view. The reason why I wanted to put this is that intensity and clarity of knowledge varies. Yeah, it is not the same for all of us. Some people think so, but there are the Tattvavada realistic school has a very realistic view of pragmatic view of this, that our knowledge is different. It is like this famous example of how many seven or six blind men touching an elephant, and each one coming up with some idea of what that elephant is. If you think this elephant here is Brahman, and these guys are the Aparoksha Jnanins, they're all touching different aspects of Brahman and getting an idea. which is what Anandji was just briefly mentioning about. So I wanted to just touch about this because we haven't yet closed this side of the coin, right? And which is what I hopefully will do over the next 15 minutes. This pramanam, okay, I told you there are two things, right? One is the means of knowledge, which is the pratyaksha anumana agama, which is what this verse was talking about. And we understood that different organisms have different capacities of these organs of perception. And because an elephant has a different one, a human being has a different set, a snake has a different set, an elephant has a different set of instruments of knowledge around the external world, they get different types of vritti jnana, and they get different clarity of knowledge, yeah, through this instrument. Now there is a deeper question. There is a deeper problem of knowledge itself. This is called Kevala Pramanam. And Srimad Acharya gives a excellent, it's amazing verses, and this is directly relates to this verse. So he says, Yatartham, Yatartha Jnanam Kevalam. So having a knowledge of a thing as it is Kevala Jnana. Is it pure knowledge? A true knowledge is that which gives the knowledge of an object as it is. That is Yatartha Jnanam. That knowledge of an object as it is of four types. Kevalam Chaturvidam. What are those four types of pure knowledge, which is really interesting? And Acharya actually gives a classification. He says, look, there is a Isha, there is a Lakshmi, there is Yogi, there is Ayogi Bedena. Okay? There is a difference in clarity and extent of knowledge of all these sentient beings. And Acharya gives a classification, a very broad classification of four. So what is that clarity of knowledge? Okay, so this is the Vedic pantheon. So the samanvaya that Srimad Acharya does is 100%. Okay? Not his invention, but actually bringing forth the philosophy of the Vedas and putting it to us for our consumption, yet many of us don't do. Okay, so what is the clarity of knowledge among sentient beings in Vedic philosophy? So he talks about Vishnu, Lakshmi, then this Chaturmukha, Vayu, Saraswati, Bharati, these three guys, as I told you, Parashukla Trayas, and then the rest of the Vedic pantheon. And he gives a classification of what their knowledge is. Okay, so I don't know whether we have a full time, but let's try. Purvam. So he says, Purvadvayam. So here what did he say? Isha Lakshmi Yogi Ayogi Bedena. Purvadvayam Anadinityam. So the knowledge of Vishnu and Lakshmi, Purvadvayam, is Anadinityam. Anadi, beginningless. Nityam, indestructible and beginningless. Vishnu and Lakshmi's knowledge of the universe is beginningless and indestructible. There is a slight difference between the two. Swatantriya, Paratantriyabhyam Tad Visheshaha. The knowledge of Vishnu, who is totally omniscient, is independent. Whereas the knowledge of Lakshmi, who is omniscient of the external world. Okay, but there are subtle differences, but her knowledge is dependent on Vishnu. Now he takes Purvam. He takes Vishnu. Purvam. Swa Paragata Akhila Vishesha Vishayam. So Vishnu's knowledge, okay, remember he doesn't have any material covering. So that is coming in the next slide. Vishnu's knowledge is omniscient, is perfectly omniscient, independent about himself and about all things of the universe, multiple universe, of all of existence, and about him. It is Anadi, it is Nitya, it is Swatantra. Okay, this is very, very important to think about. Whereas Dvitiyam Ishe Anyebhyo Adhikam Asarvatrikam Anyatra Sarva Vishayam Spashtatve Bedaha. Beautiful word there, Spashtatve Bedaha. Clarity of knowledge. Lakshmi, Shri Tattva, her knowledge of Vishnu is limited. Okay, she is our Shishya, our gurus tell us even constantly she is knowing about new attributes of Vishnu all the time. She is still learning about the qualities of Vishnu all the time. But the Shri Tattva is nevertheless omniscient of the external world. She is after all Chetana Prakriti. She is the Abhimani of the Prakriti. Yeah, in her three forms, Shri, Bhu and Durga. She knows the whole thing about the material universe. So she has an omniscient of the external world, an omniscient, full knowledge about herself. Okay, that is dependent on Vishnu. But here is a beautiful knowledge of external world of Shri Tattva, where Acharya says Spashtatve Bedaha. There is a difference in clarity. The clarity of Lakshmi is omniscient is different, less than the clarity of the omniscience of Vishnu. Okay. So then he talks about yogi jnanam. Yogi means the Riju yogis, for example, including Chaturmukha Brahma. So that is how I wanted to bring Chaturmukha Brahma in this equation. Chaturmukha Brahma is saying na vidmaha na vijanimo. About what? About this Vishnu Tattva. So what does our Pramana Lakshana talks about this? So, yogi jnanam rujunam anadi nityam. Even for rujus, their knowledge is anadi and nitya, beginningless and indestructible. Anadi nityam. But there is a difference. Ishe jivebhyo adikam. Among all the souls, about the knowledge of Vishnu, Chaturmukha has got the highest levels of knowledge. And what is that? Asarvatrikam, omniscient of his creation. After all, Chaturmukha Brahma creates, right? He is the creator under the direction of Lakshmi and Vishnu. So he must have a knowledge of the external world. Okay. But this is the beauty of Srimad Acharya. He actually takes a difference. What is that omniscience of Chaturmukha Brahma? How is it different from the omniscience of Lakshmi and omniscience of Vishnu when it comes to the external world? Okay. So the first point there is the omniscience of the external world is the inherent nature of Lakshmi and Vishnu, and it is always there effortlessly. So they are constantly, they always have the knowledge of everything, both past, present and future of the universe. They always have it. Okay, effortlessly it is always there in Lakshmi and Vishnu. Okay, whereas in Chaturmukha there is a slight difference. What is that? Asarvatrikam anyatra alochane sarva vishayam. This is the beauty of the Vedic philosophy. Anyatra alochane sarva vishayam, in the sense that if Chaturmukha puts an effort, then he will want to know about anything and everything in the universe. If he wants to know what's happening in the Andromeda galaxy sitting in Satyaloka, if he puts that effort, he will have that knowledge. Okay, whereas for Lakshmi and Vishnu, effortlessly it is always there for them. So those are all the differences. So like that, in the epistemological argument of Kevala Pramana, things move down. Okay, yogi jnanam rujunam anadi nityam ishe jivebhyo adikam asarvatrikam anyatra alochane sarva vishayam kramena vardamanam amuktehe tato avyayam tato arva kramena hrusitam sadicha tatvikebhyo anyatra ayogi jnanam utpatti vinashavat alpam. This is us. Ayogic jnanas, we are not yogis, we are ayogis. Yogis are three types. Okay, so yogis are defined as rujus, tattvabhimani devatas, and atatvabhimani devatas. Atatvikas, atatvikas, and rujus. They are the classifications of the yogic jnana. So our tattvabhimani devatas that we are talking about manas, about vak, about chakshus and so on, these tattvabhimani devatas, their knowledge is called tatvika jnanam. Okay? And that inherent nature of the sentient beings gradually goes down. Okay? It keeps on going down, and then it comes to you and me. We are the lowest. Ayogi jnanam Utpatti vinashavat. Our knowledge is what? We got a material covering, right? We see something transiently, we'll get a knowledge and then we'll forget this immediately. It is so limited. Even for souls, our sentient knowledge itself is limited. So when you look at this approach of looking at this verse of just pure knowledge itself, and when we link it up with Pramana Lakshana of Srimad Acharya, it's beautiful. As to why is it that Chaturmukha is saying na vidmaha. Vidmaha, Chaturmukha is saying na vidmaha na vijanimaha yati etat anushishyat. I don't know, he's saying Chaturmukha. I don't know that fully. Lakshmi herself don't know that fully. How can I know that fully? My knowledge is so limited. I can never know this independent Brahman whose regulatorship. Okay, so that is what is this. So these two guys, Vishnu and Lakshmi, are called Ishakoti. Okay, their knowledge is an entirely different category. Okay, so it'll be nice for us to understand this. Maybe in 5-10 minutes, I'll touch at least this slide. Ishakoti, Vishnu and Lakshmi's jnana. Their jnanam is always Swarupa jnanam. They don't have Manovritti jnanam. Why? Because they are ever liberated. They have no material covering. Only if you have material mind, then you will have Manovritti jnana. They have no Manovritti jnana. They have Swarupa jnana only. That Swarupa jnana has no beginning and eternal. Swarupa jnana of Lakshmi and Vishnu is non-different from them and is totally non-material, aprakrita. Yeah. Whereas our Vishnu is Swaparagata Akilam Vishesha Vishayam. We discussed this just now. And then Lakshmi's is, we have discussed this, that it is dependent. There is a difference in clarity of knowledge. Okay. So this is beautiful about Vishnu and Lakshmi. Then of course is after the Isha Koti is the rest of us, because Vishnu and Lakshmi are never in samsara. According to Vedic philosophy, there are only one Vishnu and one Lakshmi forever, okay, eternally, and they are ever liberated. And then there are these infinite souls who come and go in each creation, starting from Chaturmukha down to you and me. And hopefully many of us or some of us who are ayogins are also mukti yogins, that we may be suitable for liberation. Okay, so when you look at this gradation of knowledge, Tattvabhimani Devata, so these guys are called these are called Parashukla Trayas, right? Chaturmukha, Vayu, Saraswati, Bharati, and Lakshmi, they are called Parashukla Trayas. Whereas about Vishnu is Paratattva, whereas the others are Parashukla Trayas. Then the various categorization of souls, Tattvabhimani Devata, starting from Rudra, Parvati, and down. And when you go into the scriptures, you will also understand that Tattvabhimani Devatas are prone for Kali Pravesha and ignorance. Okay. If we understand and accept these concepts of what is called Kali Pravesha, then we will be able to effortlessly understand the philosophy of Mahabharata. Okay. Mahabharata can be answered if we understand this concept of Kali Pravesha happening to Tattvabhimani Devatas, Atattvika Yogins, and but primarily this Kali Pravesha is discussed in Mahabharata in this. So these guys are prone for this. And if you look at this equation here, these Chaturmukha Brahma and Vayu, Saraswati, Bharati, for example, they still have material coverings like you and me, but their material covering is very thin. Dagda Pataya Manavat, as the Vedas describe, very, very thin. It is there as though it doesn't exist. It is just there. Okay, their bodies, their linga shariras, if you like. As you go down the souls, it becomes more and more tighter and tighter and tighter. And for us, it is like impossible. Our linga sharira is so tightly enveloped that it is very, very difficult. And also our ignorance is also increasing. This is our problem. Ayogi jnanam utpatti vinashavat alpam. Okay. For Tattvabhimani Devatas, it is a lot better, but still they have Kali Pravesha. Okay. So what I'm trying to say here is there is this Isha Koti, and all us are souls, starting from Chaturmukha Brahma. These two guys are they're all pervasive. Both Lakshmi and Vishnu are ever pervasive. And of course, Lakshmi is dependent on Vishnu. That is why she is also called Samana, right? Samana is called Samana in the Vedanta Sutra. So if you look at it from a pure epistemological angle, then you will understand what is it that Chaturmukha is saying. Why? Even though he is highest among the souls, he cannot actually have the full knowledge of how this regulatorship is going on. That is why Srimad Acharya's philosophy is directly inspired by the Vedas. Yeah, he has taken these views of Kevala Pramanam from the Vedas. And this third verse of Samaveda categorically, discusses these ideas. Okay. So here I want to close off today with an interesting quiz. There are various characters of Tattvabhimani Devatas who are appearing in Mahabharata. And if you look at the various things that is going on in Mahabharata, instead of reading superficial transliteration, which personally, I've never opened a useless book of Mahabharata. I will only study Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya of Srimad Acharya, because Srimad Acharya in his Tatparya Nirnaya will use this equation of the Kevala Jnanam, the Kali Pravesha, the Parashukla Trayas, what is happening in Ishokoti, and so on, these kind of ideas that are there in the Vedas, and then make us understand what is happening in the various plots. So my humble request is, if you're reading Mahabharata, please read Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya of Srimad Acharya, which gives you all these ideas to understand the various things that are happening in Mahabharata, so that we don't make mistakes of understanding it superficially and then potentially fall down. Say, for example, I got a quiz. Who is Surya of Mahabharata? Who is going to quickly, let's do a quiz before we close. Who is going to tell us who is Surya in Mahabharata?
Karna.
Bleed.
Mahabharata. Karna.
Karna, excellent. Who is Indra in Mahabharata?
Arjuna.
Arjuna, beautiful. Who is Rudra in Mahabharata? Ashwatthama, excellent. Who is Parvati in Mahabharata?
Draupadi.
That is Saraswati.
No.
Bharati is Draupadi. Who
Sorry,
is
sir.
Parvati?
No Parvati.
Correct. There is no Parvati's avatara in Mahabharata. Very well done, Padmajaji. Who is
But
Bharati?
there is an Avesha of Parvati in Draupadi.
No.
Awesome. Correct. So there is Avesha, but there is no avatara. Well done, Sushrut. So who is Bharati? Sorry? Okay. What about Saraswati and who is Bharati of Mahabharata?
Draupadi.
Very nice. Who is Vayu of Mahabharata?
Bhima.
Bhima. Fantastic. Riju. So if you put them all, these characters of Mahabharata in this, and understand what are their swabhavas, what are their kevala pramana, what is their level of knowledge, intensity of knowledge, clarity of knowledge about Paramatma, who is Krishna, of course. Krishna, Vishnu is the equation there. Lakshmi, who are the characters of Lakshmi in Mahabharata?
Satyabhama, Rukmini,
Rukmini and Satyabhama.
And who else?
Durga.
Durga, correct. Durga, Satyabhama, and Rukmani, okay, is the avatars of Lakshmi in Mahabharata. Okay, we should study Mahabharata and Krishna's avatara in this context. There are other characters that are being given predominance in some other schools, which I personally reject, which is not Vedic. Vedas, there are only Lakshmi has got only 3 avatars, Mahabharata, Durga, Rukmani, and Satyabhama. Okay, if we need to worship them, please worship them, because Lakshmi comes down as that. Okay, Lakshmi does not have any other avatars. There are only 3. Okay, so if you put this in the equation, then you will be able to understand the beauty of Mahabharata. Mahabharata is Vedic philosophy in action, right? And if you have this kind of a map, Kali Pravesha for Tattva Bhimani Devatas, no Kali Pravesha for Parashukla Trayas, Krishna is Vishnu, Lakshmi is Rukmani Satyabhama, and then all these fellow guys who have come, Ashwatthama, Karana, Arjuna, and all these guys who are coming here, what is happening to them? When do they get Kali Pravesha? Why do they do what they do? How is Bhima doing this? Why Bhagavad Gita was never taught to Bhima, but he only was chosen and taught to Indra? All these interesting ideas will very beautifully fall into place. So I hope this was interesting with regards to giving you an idea of Kevala Pramana. Okay, so the key takeaways of this particular verse, Natatra Chakshur Gacchati, Navag Gacchati, No Manaha, Na Vidmaha, Na Vijanimo, Yati Etad Anushishyat, directly links to Katha Upanishad. Indriyebhyah Parahi Artha, Artebhyashta Param Manaha, Manasastu Para Buddhir, Buddher Atma Mahan Paraha, Mahatah Param Avyaktam. Avyaktat Purushaparaha, Purushan Naparam Kinchit, Sakashta, Saparagatihi. This Vedic pantheon, it goes about levels of knowledge and clarity of knowledge, starting from mundane folks like us to all the way to Vishnu. So the key takeaways of this third verse of Kena Upanishad is, don't search for God outside, because you will never find him in the material world. If you you can go to temples, you can go to pilgrimage and so on, but don't find him there because he is not there. Search for him inside. Okay. Your knowledge of Brahman will only be as per your capacity. Okay, this is a fundamental truth about Vedic philosophy. And the same Katha Upanishad has said, right? Paranchikani vetrunat swayambhuhu tasmad parang pashyati na antaratman kaschid dhiraha pratyagatmanam aikshat avruta chakshuhu amrutatvam. Only few want to go inside. For all others, Paramatma has put their external indriyas facing outside so that they can enjoy the material world and be stuck. Some of us may do this for some time and then feel, oh, this is all transient, it's full of suffering. I want to make the inward journey. When we make that decision, what do those fellows do? They close the external eyes, avritta chakshuhu. They open their internal eyes, amrutatvam. Okay. So in this equation, we as jivas, we are nowhere. Our knowledge of Brahman is practically negligible or non-existence at this point of time. So we got to make this inward journey. Okay. This is the view of the pragmatic realistic schools. But yet there are some folks who claim they themselves are Brahman. They themselves are Vishnu. They have omniscience of the whole world and they can create the universe. Okay, that is a sad, sad state of affairs. It's a sad, sad philosophy. It is not going to take us towards liberation. Again, the same Katha Upanishad has said that he who thinks that goes to, he falls down very quickly. When our Chaturmukha himself has said, Natatra chakshur gacchati navag gacchati no manaha na vidmaha na vijanimo yatedat anushishyat. He is not saying, I am Brahman, I know everything, let me tell you about that. You are also Brahman. No, there is the Sadashiva, there is the Chaturmukha. They are talking about this Vishnu Tattva. He is saying this fellow is infinitely knowledgeable and so on. So how is it possible that some folks claim they are Brahman? So they need to make the serious contemplation about this and take the truth from the Vedas so that we are all making the right direction towards salvation. Okay, so on that note, I am going to close today's session because there is still more to be said. Even the first three mantras, our gurus teach us there is science, there is philosophy in the maths. Okay, not just in these three. Then it comes to the fourth verse, which is beautiful. It actually gives you an ontological categorization of entities and it gives you an ontological arguments about the Vishnu Tattva. Anyadeva tadviditat, ato aviditat, adi. Iti Shushruma Purvesham Yenas Tad Vyachachakshire. That verse is also a beautiful verse that will take up the ontological categories of everything that exists in the universe. Okay. And then, of course, there are 5 other verses that coming up that closes this adhyaya, and each one is again beautiful. Okay. So on that note, Krishna Pranamastu. If there are no questions, I'll just make a brief announcement. So our Gita Chintana chapter 7 is happening from next Sunday, and we are going to have 2 sessions, one next to each other. So we'll have one on the so where are we? So one will be on the 15th and the other one on the 27th. So 2 Gita sessions, coordinated by Venki ji from the US, with very many satsangis contributing to those 2 sessions. So I'm looking forward to that. So Deval ji, any questions? You have raised your hand.
I'll wait till your announcement is over.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm done my announcements. So join us for next week for Gita Chintana. So Deval ji, over to you for questions.
Just a quick question. So when you talk about Kali Pravesha, is it the same as ignorance or is this something different?
Very, 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 very good question, Deval ji. So this is really interesting, yeah, because the Kali of Vedic philosophy is the Satan of Christianity. Okay, so the hope that gives you the answer. The Kali of Vedic philosophy is the Satan of the Abrahamic religions. So go and study about the Satan of Abrahamic religions and what Satan does. Okay, so Kali is the highest of demons. So if, for example, we have got Tattvabhimani Devatas, right? So you got all these Suras. So there are the Suras and there are the Asuras. Okay, so in the Suras, you have a gradation from the highest to Sura, Chaturmukha, down to the lowest. Okay. Similarly, for Asuras also, the Vedic philosophies talk about there is the gradations of demons. And there are these Asuras or the demons or the Brahman haters. the ones that hate Brahman, they are able to induce that ignorance starting from Tattvabhimani Devatas. Okay, so it is, you are right in that sense. Kali Pravesha means it is like they get a temporary ignorance because of Kali Pravesha, or they forget about doing something because of Kali Pravesha, or they're influenced to do something which is not as per their swabhava. So those kind of ideas. But Kali is, Duryodhana is the Kali there. So if you go to Mahabharata, the Kali's avatara in Mahabharata is Duryodhana. Duryodhana is Kali. Anagashri.
Guruji, I just wanted to ask like a similar question. We talked about the Mahabharata and avatars, and we all know Srimad Acharya's avatara was Bhimsena. But in Bhagavad Gita, the Vibhuti Yoga, 10th chapter, Krishna basically lists what he is amongst. For example, Aksharanam Akarosmi, Parvatanam I'm Meru amongst the Parvatas, amongst the Nagas I'm Ananta. So he basically he indicates that he's the best amongst what the group of things are. And he also says Pandavanam Arjunosmi. I am Arjuna amongst Pandavas. I've always had this question as to why does not Krishna say that he is Bhima amongst Pandavas, and have not able to find the answer anywhere. So I don't know if you can please shed some light on that.
Yeah, sure, Panagaji. So the easy answer to that is when you look at the Vibhuti Yoga of that particular chapter, there are various Vibhutis that are discussed. It's called Sajatiya, Vijatiya, Vibhutis, and there are classifications. So the way, so my advice there is please check out TSR's book in this particular issue about what are the various Vibhutis, Sajatiya, Vijatiya classifications. So when Krishna says, Pandavanam, I am Arjuna, that means after Bhimasena, I am in Arjuna. So Bhimasena is given and then it is Arjuna. So similarly, he will say, I am in Vedanam Samavedo Asmi. That means after Rig Veda, I am in Samaveda. So there's those classifications are there, Panagaji, about the nuances of understanding the Vibhuti, Sajatiya, Vijatiya, and excluding some and doing this and so on. So to check out those rules of interpretation. It's very beautifully discussed in by TSRG.
TSRG. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. So if there are no further questions, look forward to next week and the following week for Gita Chintana. So I would also request that we do some homework and do some reading, because I'm sure there'll be some questions during presentations from Venki ji and others. Okay. So on that note, may I request Suresh ji to take us through Omkara, and we close today's session. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Take care, and we'll catch up in a fortnight for Upanishad, but see you for Gita next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.